Shout out. Okay, so to those of you who didn't make it to the final, I'm just saying, I just want to say debating is worth it. Most importantly, don't end your life like Op will tell you to do. Because life is I have to make sure my tech does not fail me first. I'm used to using a touch screen. Alright. Starting in a 3, 2. This is a truth value debate. It means we need to epistemically assess the truth value within this debate. Secondly, this is a debate that we are showing that something outweighs the other. We cannot have a comparison to say it's symmetric on both sides, which means we cannot have a debate in the first place. I'm going to do two things in terms of what we can do from opening government. I'm going to show you the framework within which you should evaluate morality and why that is the most consistent framework within the debate. The second thing I'm going to do is to prove to you why life in of itself is inherently utile and why we need to push a teleological direction that constantly values that the existence of itself and the portrayal of existence is beneficial. That's why uniquely we are going to win this debate from opening government, because every other benefit that comes or every single analysis that comes will be premised on a framework first of all, but secondly, why this is a teleological direction that outweighs a conversation about pain, because we will prove to you why the conversation of pain and every other thing rests on the idea that you value the existence of life in of itself, because without the existence of life, there is no moral agent to do moral things within itself, which means this whole bench loses the comparative. The first thing is the framing. Why is the utilitarian decision calculus the most important moral framework? And what we are saying is that we are proving net utility. Why? First of all, morality exists to guide actions, not to express virtue. Any moral system that cannot tell us what to do when values conflict fails its primary task. Real moral problems are not clean. People involve trade-offs all the time within their lives. Freedom, suffering, futures. The ontology tells us to act in a certain way, but offers no principled way to choose when rules collide. And that's why you cannot resolve with things like moral dilemmas and all those other stuff, which means that the ontology cannot be the comparison as the best moral framework within the debate. But secondly, utility is the only intersubjective moral currency. Why? Because moral disagreement is inevitable. People disagree about dignity, sanctity, intention, purity, and even desert. What they do not disagree about is that suffering is bad, is that flourishing is good, which means that these things are quantifiable things that we can epistemically access to make hyper-rational decisions as to whether something outweighs the other or not. That is why this becomes the very framework. But most importantly, all moral frameworks that exist within status quo secretly rely on utility. Consider why we care about rights. Because violating them will cause harm. That is a disutility, which is a utilitarian calculation. Consider why intent matters, because it predicts future outcomes, which means that the future outcomes are premised on utility. So all these things prove to you that every single moral framework rests on the idea of utility. Let's have the debate proper. Why is human existence net utile? And why should we push this teleological direction? 5 levels of analysis. I'll take your time. First thing, there's a revealed preference that shows life itself is net utile. Why? Because the strongest evidence that life is worthwhile is not an abstract argument that these people are coming to give you. It is behavior. Why? Because across cultures, era, and material conditions, the overwhelming majority of people choose to continue living, even under severe hardship. This includes population facing poverty, illness, conflict, and oppression. If life were negatively inherent, because this is a truth value debate, if it were truly negative, then we would observe widespread, stable preferences for non-existence. But we don't see that in status quo. Even those who articulate pessimism, philosophies like nihilism, all those other stuff, they still eat, they still plan, most of these people save in pensions, which means that they agree that the continuation of life is important, and that's why when they are hungry they eat. That's why they are saving for pensions, all those other stuff, which means that intrinsically they then value to be true that existence and the continuation of existence outweighs non-existence on our side of the house. This is a truth value debate. We are giving the very evidence that exists in status quo. The second thing, notice that asymmetry between harm and value itself favors existence. Why? Because non-existence cannot experience relief, peace, or the absence of suffering. It experiences nothing. That cannot be said to be a benefit, or you are avoiding pain. But by contrast, on our side of the house, existence allows for both suffering and its mitigation. And that's why you have things like affirmative action. That's why you have things like all these things to make charity, all those things to make people's life better, to make sure that we take them out of pain and all the other things that exist. On your side is non-existence. So everyone just gets like wiped off, which means that the moral agent, which is supposed to like experience happiness, pain, or even a combination of both, you annihilate the moral agent, which means that you annihilate the capacity for them to feel pain and for them to feel pleasure. Even if there's the smallest chance that they feel pleasure on their side, you rob them of that agency to feel that, because non-existence does not give you the agency to experience any other thing. And that's why they lose. Prosper shoot.
This debate could be about the ontology, because I still think it is inherently wrong.
Yeah. Prosper. I won't have that in this file now. You can prove why it is about the ontology. We are weighing that something is more beneficial than the other, or outweighs the other, which means that we need to have a moral framework that all of us can weigh. The only moral framework that we can weigh in order to make that decision, and the best moral framework that we can weigh, is utility. And I prove that to you. We cannot have that class 1 conversation within this final. That's why you're losing the debate outrightly. But most important, why do we think, and this is an epistemic evidence, why? Because life persists because it selects for continuation. This is not a trivial claim. Listen, this is evolution, because it's complex. So I need to explain to you. Organisms that found existence net negative would not reproduce. They will protect their offspring. They will invest in survival. The fact that complex life has evolved over time, evolution keeps on selecting weaker like traits and all those things out, and humans keep on reproducing to pass on stronger traits, means that most times they constantly believe that the existence and the passing of those traits itself is inherently valuable. It's a truth value debate. Do humans think existence outweighs non-existence? We've proven to you why existence is what human thinks outweighs non-existence. Incredibly proud to colonize.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll call on the leader of opposition to begin the OOKs.
The case from Op is quite simple. What determines whether or not one value outweighs the other? In our case, it's simple. The moral value of life and the extent to which you can maximize that value is always, and I repeat, always subject to the existence of suffering and your ability to minimize or endure suffering. Why is this true? Your ability to maximize the value of life, that's your ability to be happy to the largest extent, primarily depends on your ability to endure whatever suffering that you inevitably face. Why is this important? It's important in the way because ultimately it is impossible to avoid or eliminate suffering. That means that the side that shows that our value and the premise on which we build it helps people to avoid the suffering in its entirety, no matter the utility they may get from maximizing value, which will be subject to the suffering, is best and outweighs whatever utility that they preach on their end. They did a very bad job at characterizing to you what the debate is about. First of all, what does it mean when we say we are valuing life? What does it mean to say there is a moral value of life? What does it mean to say there is a moral imperative to avoid suffering? They didn't tell you any of that. Which prime minister does that? What's next? What then does that mean? What then does that mean? What then does it mean when we say that life has moral value? This is what it means. The existence of life is what gives rise to the potential to achieve some usefulness or some qualities of life. That means that life is valuable to me to the extent to which I can do something with that life. Why is that important? Value is not determined in a vacuum. So they can't say that there's inherently value in life until they can show that the extent to which I can utilize that life, it's what brings that value to me, or the quality to which I utilize that life is what brings the value. Why is this particularly important? It is important because your ability to exercise agency and achieve things like happiness is a determinant of the extent of the value you place on life. Number two, your ability to form and maintain identities and gain fulfillment means that you are gaining some value from the life that you have. Number three, your ability to belong, self-actualize, form part of your society means that you are making some usefulness out of that life, and that brings you some value and some happiness. Why is my claim of the accessibility of value true and important? Because even though we agree that there is value to life, and we do all we can to place a premium on life, even if it is non-human life, that's why some people actually agitate for animal rights and animal life. Even though we acknowledge this, we realize instances where society and individuals recognize that even though there is the existence of life, there is no value in that life. Why is that true? We euthanize people when they become vegetables, when they are so sick that they cannot do anything with their lives. And so they just lie there. At that point, we say there is no value to that life because the suffering has far exceeded and limited any agency or potential benefit of that life. Number two, we sentence people to capital punishment because we think that because of the detrimental usefulness of their life, there's actually no value. So we murder people because the suffering they cause determines the non-value of that life. This analysis alone shows that the imperative to avoid suffering, we all recognize that it actually overshadows the moral value that we place on life. Why is that then important? Because the usefulness of life and the quality that life allows us to have is why we place premium, like I told you, we do things like human rights, agitation. To a larger extent, that is why we still insist on their end that pronatalism is a good thing because notwithstanding the suffering, we think it's a good thing to give birth to life. That's what they say. And this is why we oppose to them. What does it mean when we say there is a moral imperative to prevent suffering? First of all, number one, we all agree suffering is a bad thing. One, it can be artificial through wars or intentionally designed systems like capitalism, which will mean the poor people suffer. Even the rich people who get the money suffer to get the money. Patriarchy, which means that by virtue of your gender, you are determined or to a life of suffering unless you change your gender. That one cry, there is discrimination for trans people. Natural sufferings like disasters, lottery of birth. By the mere fact that I am born in Ghana, I am suffering more than someone born in US. Why? Number three, illness. The next point of analysis is that suffering, as long as I've analyzed you here, limit your agency and your ability to enjoy life, even if you are Obama. Once you get ill and you are paralyzed, we agree that if you are unable to continue living, you must die, and we must end your suffering. That's the premise on which we kill you. I'll get on to that. But it limits your agency. You are sick, you are a woman, all those things is subjected to some suffering that makes it unable to fulfill the moral value that you place on life. But most importantly, that kind of suffering is inevitable. Like, no matter what you do, once you are born as a human, you are subject to that existence of suffering. Even if it is lower than others, you are still suffering. That is why it is important. No matter the extent of your suffering, there's a reality that we cannot eliminate suffering. So at best, from the premise of antinatalism, we attempt to alleviate suffering because of the moral imperative to prevent suffering by doing things like humanitarian aid. We attempt to prevent and avoid suffering by doing things like justice movement. Even though you know the patriarchy will oppress you, you know that that suffering is illegitimate. So because of the moral imperative to avoid that, you agitate or you agitate against oppression. In the extreme, we say that that suffering should not even exist. So we support antinatalism. If I don't live, if I don't exist, no suffering. That is the premise. That's what it looks like. Why is that a better world? And why do we think it outweighs the value they place on life? We are not saying there's no value of life. I've already explained that. We say that that value, even to the extent that you enjoy it best, can be truncated and will be truncated and is subject to suffering. Because of that, the moral imperative to avoid or prevent suffering outweighs whatever utility you get from the moral value of life. Why is this important? The analysis I gave you. By virtue of practices we do like euthanasia, capital punishment, all those things, we understand as humans that notwithstanding all the things that life enables us to achieve, once suffering sets in, it is an overwhelming imperative that does away with whatever utility you gain from life. So at worst, where we have to choose avoiding suffering and preserving that value of life, the answer is quite simple. We make that answer always. That is why we are having this debate. We kill people to avoid further harm. We kill people so that they don't suffer anymore. This debate is actually won by my speech only, but they will prove why we actually won it in extenso. What's next? What's next?
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now call on the Deputy Prime Minister to extend the opening government speech.
Okay, so thank you all for being here for the final. Just a few things. I would say that, yes, is there a timer? Please start. Thankfully, BP is not a sport that respects style. No matter how you speak, so far as you're speaking English, it is great for BP debates in this country at least. In some countries, they speak Spanish, Chinese, Portuguese. The point is, how you speak should not be a determinant of how far you go, and I'm proof of that. This is for the new speakers, obviously. May we all be great. 3, 2, 1. Let's have this debate realistically. And Marfo realized he lied to you, so he avoided my interrogation. We don't euthanize people because they are vegetables. In which country is that even done? But note, even in countries that legalize euthanasia, the person themselves or a family member they have consigned their agency to is the one who tells the doctors and gives them permission to euthanize the person. That person must be alive to tell the doctor that they should end your life. That is our case. That even to prevent suffering, even to avoid suffering, which is the new invention he creates, you need to have life. And the reason you even have the power to say you want to prevent suffering, to say you want to avoid suffering, is because we have not just given you life, but we have attached a moral value to it, such that you then make the decision in some instances as to how your life goes. He says life does not matter as much as the utility we get from it. Think about this. To be able to get utility in the very first place, you have to have life. How do we even know that there is this utility? How are we even having a conversation about this utility? is because we have life. That is, the prerequisite for which we have even this privilege is one that is more important than whatever determination, such that preventing suffering is even a value of having life. If you didn't have life, how will you know that you have to prevent suffering? But next thing, he talks about avoiding suffering and enduring suffering. Unfortunately, that is the Gulf case. Your case is to show how suffering never happens at all. It means move, because that's, I don't know if we understand what prevent and avoid means. I don't want to get into the grammar, but prevention is that there are a couple members of the I won't waste time on this. It means that they have to show why it's important to make sure that these things never happened. And since it is inevitable, per Elo's framing, they have two choices. A, to end all human life, or B, hope that human life probably degrades to the point where there is no longer a human life. Because if he says that suffering is inevitable, it means there is no way they live and they don't suffer. I'm going to take two extensions then in my speech. The first thing I'm going to tell you is an even if. It's very important. On why, even if this debate is a deontological debate, we win. How do we even create deontology? Deontology is created based off an inherent value that people have to then determine that something is right and something is wrong. So you cannot even give a concrete value to life. But Johnson tells you that the reason life's concrete value become apparent to all of us, despite what we believe in, is because of the utilities we get from it. Whether you are utilitarian in this debate or deontological in this debate, first, both are moral frameworks. I don't even know why we are having this conversation. But second, the point is that deontology itself leads to some desirable outcomes. If even not for the most people, it is for a reasonable amount of people, at least for those who buy into it. The second clarification I want to make, yes.
You are right. I lied in my first POI. The debate is not about deontology. However, you still need to prove how there is a net positive on your side by existing through pain. You don't do that. You just, it's axiomatic and secular reasoning. Yeah, you're going to say that you are lying when it's your time again. I don't know what you want to achieve here. But this is it. Johnson tells you that the net positive starts at a point where you are able to access utility in the very first place. Because not being able to access utility makes it a total negative. But for a lot of people, maybe you don't have the right to choose whether you want a Lambo or a Rolls Royce. But you can choose whether you have whether you go to Legon or UCC. These are choices that, at least to a level where we have stratified ourselves in society, look like utility to us. So somebody will be so happy they got KNUST even though they could be studying here. Why is it that even though this is a better university objectively, they are happy? Because at least given the level of suffering they may go through, they find that this is utility to them given their stratification. I think a lot of us, while we want to get very big things, we still have small wins that we get. So for example, some people, I think everyone here has made a final before. But the point is that there are people here who desire this utility of being in a final that, at least for some of us, in so many cases with our stratification, we can aspire to it. So those who do not break, probably is a far off thing. But for those who made the semi-final, at least they know that this is something they can aspire to. Our cases, at every level in human experience, there is a utility to aspire to. Those who didn't break want to break. Those who made the semi-final want to make the final. Those who made the final want to win. Those who win want to be better than me. At every point, there is something that people want, and that in itself, at the point where they desire it, is a net utility over all their suffering. So they cannot say that absolute utility is possible, because yes, while suffering is inevitable, I think absolute utility is something that does not exist. But how they are endangering the valuability of not just one life, but more people's life.
And that disrespect of the value of life is why we harm those people. What is that? Utility, because they may kill more people. But secondly, this is one of the ways we make suffering less apparent. 2, more people in the world means more ideas. More people in the world means more ways or more innovations to make the world better. Our case is simple. At every point in time, given that they need to be alive to even prevent suffering, because you have to make the decision to prevent suffering while you are alive, and that decision comes as a function of having life in the very first place, OG is logically proud proposition.
Thank you very much for that speech.
This is your shout out. But thank you to everybody that has contributed to my journey being here. Thank you to the University of Ghana Debate Society. I think this final is an image of the amazing stuff all of you are going to do throughout the year. And I want to point out that the views I'm about to talk about are my personal views. And you need to pay attention to them. I'll need some silence now. Thank you. 2 days ago, a group of boys called me crazy because I said I wanted only one child. Their reasoning: who would not want to have a lot of children? Who will take care of you when you are old? What was my challenge? That is an incredibly selfish position to take. How can a person conceive that merely because of an idea and a retirement plan, you would subject a person to the inevitability of the suffering of life? Then I thought to myself, the perception of the value of life is based on a very interesting scale, the scale of utility. And that's the trajectory of OG's speech, because they claim that is the best moral framework for this debate to be judged, and that is incredibly selfish. I'll deal with it in my speech. I'll be doing a couple of things then. 1, deconstructing OG. 2, provide a chat on 2 things. 1, the immorality of the Gov defense, and 2, its justification for non-existence. Let's start with the deconstruction. 1, their calculus. They say that the reason why the deontology cannot be the comparative is that deontology does not have governing principles, and secondly, that it ultimately falls back to some benefits that you would get at the end of the day. Problem: these are the 2 governing principles of deontology. 1, the protection of human agency, and 2, the universal application of an idea. I would mechanize this in my justifications. But I need to point out that me pointing out these justifications already take out that claim OG doesn't have a calculus first to engage with. But then they say let's take them at their best, because assuming we want to judge the debate on utilitarianism, the problem is it is not the best way that any Gov team can win this debate. Because the problem about life is that life is an abstract concept. Nobody can prove that you exist except by an action. What that means is it is until I interact with you that you know that I exist. That is why you don't even know if there's a poor Kwame in the UK, because you have not interacted with him and cannot assert that he is alive. That means and interactions are the fulcrum of pain and pleasure. What that means is the assessment of the assessment of life then cannot be necessarily on utility, but it has to be on deontology, because then it boils down to the impact on all those things. And then the assessment that we bring from our side is that it's on a simple way of logical precedence. The prevention of suffering and the maximization of existence is what facilitates the premise of the value of life in most instances. Secondly, the thing that they say is that people choose to live. The problem is there wouldn't be, if that is true, and the mechanism is in status quo, even when people are in suffering, they are still choosing to live. The problem is, if that is true, why would there be a fight in status quo for the right to die in many places, and people are acting for the legal, medically assisted euthanasia? If the comparative is how people are reacting in status quo to existence, I don't think that can be the mechanisms that win them this debate. Let's get into the asymmetry. I'll get into you, Jed. Let me get into my case. I think that they say that pleasure is, the point is here. Pleasure is only valuable because you exist. So that cannot be the measure by which you judge the abstract concept of life in itself that holds its value. What that means in most instances is that is a concession that they have to make, and they already make it within their speech. But here's the problem. They make this debate about post-existence to say that we are the side that says everybody should die, we should kill everybody. But the problem is, I think the spirit of this debate allows us to say we would prefer that someone did not exist so that they wouldn't have to experience pain in the first place, but pleasure is not a utility utility for them because it never existed in the first place. I think that's where the debate is. But even in post-existence, I think that Marfo does work to prove that society in jeering innovation gears towards the reduction of suffering. Why is this the case? Because pain and pleasure are opposite things of the same spectrum. What that means is a reduction of pain is inherently an increase of pleasure, inherently. What that means is most innovation can be tied into these two things. I am saying, because they are coupled together, if we don't exist, we don't need to experience it. And if society has done work to reduce pain, we think that that inherently surmises that we inherently value the conversation of reducing suffering over just merely existing. We win this debate in opening half. Let's get into the immorality of the gap defense, and here's where the deontological conversation comes in. I'll take you when I am explaining it. Good. I think the first thing that you have to explain is, what they have to justify is that you have to live, even in pain. What that means is, even when you're in a vegetative state, we think that we should just allow you to exist, and we should not assert a moral action of removing you from existence when you are in that pain or whatever existence you are in, and that even if we know that we do not have the resources to take care of someone and make sure they're able to have the best life they can, knowing fully what they suffer, we still allow them to exist because life is a precious thing. Here's a justification that makes this thing incredibly bad. I think what Marfo does work to point out to you is very simple. That pain reduces the agency of an individual in a number of ways. Because one, pain is incredibly crippling in the way that the human being engages with it. Let me explain. For things like illnesses, it seems very apparent that it reduces your capacity to take particular actions. But for things like mental pain that exists, like aspirational duress, like you want to make a final and you don't make the final, the problem is, it is an overwhelming thing that clouds your mind and reduces your capacity to notice the good things that are around you that will normally motivate you to be able to take actions in the first place. Because the way actions work is that actions must have rewards with them. If you don't begin to recognize the rewards that are around you by noticing the pleasure that is around you, and you notice the pain that is around you that is a punishment for an action, you are less likely to take that action in the first place, which is a reduction of your agency in the first place. But secondly, most often, pain is not something that is internally generated. It's often a consequence of things that are outside your control and things that affect you in most instances. What that means again is, oh, I'm so sorry. What that means again, I can't take this. What that means again is that it's a limitation of the agency. Why is the limitation of agency such a very important thing? Because the principle of deontology that says that human agency is important stands that principle for one simple idea, that the only thing that makes a human being unique among the different things that exist around us is that the human being is able to make decisions. What that means in most instances, and that is only a concession that is made after the fact that there's probably no choice that you have in you existing in the first place. What that means in most instances is, on our side, if we reduce the thing that limits people's agencies in their experience of life, that in their human interactions and whatnot, we're the side that is winning this debate because you don't exist, there's no value of that thing to you in the first place in a way that means that harms you in most instances. But then the second thing is why the justification that exists on our side. I think that the justification that exists for the side that we're taking here is very, very simple. That the way life inherently exists is that life has limited resources and it requires a competition of individuals for them to be able to even maximize the agency and live. All those things require pain. All those things require suffering. All those things are things that make it very difficult for you to exist within these spaces. Which means that if we prevent you from experiencing all those things, which are inevitable, we're the side that wins this debate. It's been a good debate.
Thank you very much for that speech. We have come to the end of the opening half. We call on the member of government to begin the closing half.
Some lovely shout.
Some shouts out. The first thing is I think regardless of this debate, women should be given the choice to decide whether or not they want to have kids. I don't think that because, for example, individuals think life isn't suffering, we should do things like force people to give birth, etc. And then finally, I want to say a big thank you to everybody that has been nice to me in this comp. And yeah, let's do this. All right. I just want to point out that this debate is not about whether or not there is value of life or whether or not there's an imperative need to end suffering. That is not the debate. The debate is asking us to engage the truth value of which one outweighs the other in an instance where we have to choose between the two. So arguments in this round about the value of life exists or the imperative to end suffering is real can't be the arguments that engage this debate. But secondly, there must be a comparative of the two in how these moral frameworks are created, in understanding which one outweighs the other. I'm first going to start by saying that OG says the ontology doesn't matter in this debate. I am sorry, we are not going to do that. We are going to run away from that because we can. They are making the debate equally very undebatable on the Gulf side, and the manual allows us to do this. Why is that the case? Because if we are going to be looking at an individual's ability to gain pain or to be able to be happy, the main moral framework for that is utilitarianism. The Gulf side can't be the side that engages a debate where we decide what is more important or what outweighs the other based on utility. Because on our side, we are saying things are valuable just because they exist. That is what the ontology means, and that is what the categorical imperative preaches. I am not sure what OO was doing by trying to steal the categorical imperative, but that's their problem. I think a couple of things then must be engaged. One, suffering or the absence of it is subjective, and that is extremely important. And I think that before we even get into that, three contentions from our side. One, that life is valuable regardless of the results or outcomes, be it pain and pleasure. But two, we think that it is very important that we create a world where people cannot justify ending life because of suffering. And then finally, a life-first moral approach actually leads to a more ethical society and ensures that we have institutions that are morally good. So back to my case on suffering and why the absence of it or the presence of it is subjective. I think a couple of things are important. We have a different perception of pain. This looks like biological factors. Depending on what you are, your makeup, you may feel pain when certain things happen to you, or you may not feel pain when certain things happen to you. Personal opinions of what the threshold of pain is. Third, mental fortitude. But fourth, socialization and experiences. What this means is that there are things that people may think are painful and things that people may see as suffering that others may not see as suffering. Two examples. One, I don't like to get hit, but if you hit me in the bedroom, I may like it. Two, I don't like to get hit, but Anthony Joshua gets paid for being hit. What this inherently means is that in most instances, people cannot just ascertain what suffering is. Why is this extremely important? For us to be able to have a moral imperative, it means that the threshold should be something that we can weigh and measure. The fact that this is something that we cannot weigh and measure makes it extremely difficult in ascertaining the idea that it is more valuable than something that is easy to measure. Life is a basic unit. It looks like the ability to breathe air, the ability to be alive makes you someone that is experiencing the value of life. The simple case here is that the subjective nature of it is something that makes it very difficult for us to use as a metric when we are deciding between what we should outweigh and what we should measure, like we should think as important. But most importantly, I think I completely want to point this out. We think that there are things that we all think are suffering. For example, sickness is suffering. The threshold of the extent of the sickness is not something that we can decide in this debate. Suffering happens on a spectrum, and because it is a spectrum, the point here is that if we are discussing moral frameworks and what outweighs the other one, the thing is very simple. The one that is easy to measure is what we must do. POI.
So, just because suffering is a spectrum does not mean that you don't have something that will make you suffer. If there's something that will make you suffer, it means there is a certainty of some suffering.
Yeah. We don't think that suffering does not exist. That is not the debates that we are having. We are saying that suffering exists. The point here is that you can't say that the imperative to end suffering outweighs the moral value of life, because it is difficult to ascertain the extent and the threshold of what suffering is used, what level of suffering is used to decide what outweighs the moral value of life. That's all we are saying. They can prove suffering on their side. That's their business. Look at the motion. The next thing then becomes the conversation about utility. Because at the end of the day, I've proven or I've explained to you that utility is the main basis on their side. Why is utilitarianism very dangerous? For a couple of things. Because it is something that is majoritarian. What that means is that in most instances, people can choose suffering for you and use that as a reason to take away things that are valuable, like your life. An example here is slavery. Just because individuals were not enlightened and did not dress a certain way, people said that their lives were less valuable and so they could be condemned to slavery. The point here is that we can't live in a utilitarian world where we live in a world that is unfair, when the power structures that exist have already been built, and despite the fights that we try every day, these things are not being changed and the change is not here anyway. Then why do we win on deontology? We think that it's important for you to understand a couple of things. Deontological frameworks exist in our society and we use them anyway, whether these people in this debate want to engage that or not. Two examples. One, natural rights, the right to life, is deontological. Two, enshrined constitutional rights, like the right to bear arms in the US and the right to education. What this means is that society agrees that there are basic things that individuals cannot do without. Where is the conversation here then? If the basic unit of deontology and the categorical imperative that states that this thing that you are doing is wrong and would always be wrong despite the circumstances and the consequences or the context of the conversation, which is the ability for you to have life, because you can't enjoy any of the deontological rights etc. without life in and of itself. If we create a world on their side where we say that suffering or anything that threatens your life is a reason why, for example, we must end your life, you must not give birth, etc., we undercut deontology in and of itself and make it extremely difficult for people to have a moral fabric, because then we create a situation where the categorical imperative in and of itself isn't strong, insofar as there's an ability to undercut the basis of the categorical imperative, which is life. Finally, we think that things like don't give birth, I don't want to have children, or I want to have one children, is very dangerous. Why? Because we do not give individuals in the future the ability to choose. We rob them of choice. If the truth about choice is that it is based on informed consent and the ability for individuals to have access to enough information to choose whether something is good or bad, people must live an experienced life to decide whether or not they choose to live. You can't tell us that because you think life is not great, the next generation should not enjoy it, or we should actively reduce the number of people who get access to these things. It's very simple. Look at your notes, look at the motion, CG wins.
Thank you very much for that speech. We call on the member of opposition to continue the opposition please.
Go for me, boy.
Woo! This thing is not large enough. But the problem is I need to see the way my mind works. I have to see.
I can hold it for you.
Okay, let me see how I can.
Let me stand there.
Improvise. You improvise. Can become a president. You think we'll allow you to do this? If you become a president.
I apologize for seeming like a selfish person, but my mind really can't.
You should go to a psychiatrist.
If you become president.
Why can't you just
There you are.
First, shout out. Uche said I should do that to her because she...
You should not choose the
But the second thing is, I really want to dedicate this speech to the KDS society. I think it's the only society I've been to that I actually feel I belong in. Family to church. Being a part of, and I feel I actually belong. Like KDS, I love you so much, you're my family. Let's do this. But the final dedication is to all those who do not believe in themselves. I always do this. I think it's really important. You are great. You are a star. Let's start with this.
We have time.
No, can't see.
We'll start your time.
I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So far, 2 metrics for judging this debate. First, deontology, and second, a utilitarian calculus. We are just going to win on both fronts. But the first thing I would like to do is really explain the importance of understanding this from a utilitarian calculus. This is not analysis that Eziel says about why we value utility, etc. This is fundamental to how this debate works. Because this debate is, you should see this debate from a mathematical perspective. This is how it goes like. We can say that we value non-existence, which is 0. What they are trying to prove is that when you live, there is net util outcomes, which means it's positive. What does this mean for opening half? It means opening opposition is not done. You cannot just weigh that non-existence is a 0 outcome. You need to weigh that comparatively when people live, they experience situations where the outcomes are net negative for them. So it's not enough to say, oh, non-existence is a 0 outcome or a 0-sum game. What we are going to do is going to win on this metric by proving the comparative as to why, on a scale, net negative outcomes happen to people on several fronts. But the first metric on deontology, I think Prosper will engage this. But the first thing I would just like to flag here is that a lot of people do not consent into being born because we are thrust from a state of non-existence into a world that forces us to live. Why is this important? One, Eziel points out that people consent to continue living, and so that's a metric. 2 things to note about that. 1, people actually do not consent because their willingness to live is not one that is born off of their own agency, but 2 important things. 1, people are constrained by people that they love, their family members, and other people around them, people they form social ties with, which forces them to stay alive. So it's not true inherently that people want to continue living. The second thing to take down that claim here is that there's a social conditioning that exists that forces everybody to prioritize life. So it's not as a result of your own will, but it's as a result of your exposure to conditioning agencies. For example, schools, for example, religion that tells you to always value life. So your willingness to continue surviving is not one that is born out of true consent, it's one that has been constrained. Let's go to the second metric and win this debate from here. I think this is really important for engaging these guys. Plus, I'll do the meta then. Metric on utility. What we are going to prove here is why life is summarily net negative. Before I get into 3 substantive points of mechanisms to prove this, yes, Opana.
Yes, we agree that suffering is inevitable, but a drop of water to a child in Palestine, by the time they get it, it's more than
I get it.
Because they need
I get it. That POI works for opening half conversation. Because what they try to prove here is that suffering exists. But the problem is the contention in opening half is not about whether or not suffering exists. Because a lot of the analysis that you hear from Marfo is, oh, what about this woman who is suffering? And all the examples I give which proves suffering exists. That's not the contention. And that's why we are upstream that class, because we are going to prove why it's summarily net negative. So even if there are good pleasures that exist, we'll still win on that metric. 3 ways to prove this. One, I actually want to say that there's a game theory that exists within life. The way in which human beings operate is one that guarantees perpetual suffering. Why? When I got to this final, a team had to opt out. A team wasn't part of the final. They had to not break. This was something that was suffering for them. What this means then is that the way in which human beings operate is one that guarantees that if I pursue my own happiness, someone else is meant to suffer. Why is this important? Because this mechanism is important because it proves that the metric is not about life suffering existing, but it's about the perpetuality of life existing, which is a metric that beats open opposition in that regard. A couple of structural reasons to prove why this is the case. One, everyone strives to get the best outcomes for themselves. Why? Human beings are inherently selfish and want to prioritize their own needs. But the possible response is, some people are not selfish. What is my pushback to this? This might be true, but in their bid to do good things, they isolate their community that they prioritize over other people. So even if people are selfless, their selflessness still hurts other people. But the second reason why this is structurally impossible to prove is because we have limited empathy. We don't care about everybody in the world. See, people like to pretend that they care about the kids in Palestine. But see, if you have fufu with you right now, you forget about them. This is the limited empathy that people have, for which it constrains people's ability to care about more and more people. This proves why human beings are constantly selfish, which proves that every outcome that they get would be for themselves and would be at the expense of someone else's suffering. This analysis proves why suffering will be perpetual. The second thing to prove here, I would want to note, is the hedonistic treadmill that human beings experience. Let's explain and mechanize why this is important. Let's say you don't buy the first mechanism. It's important to point out that open governments might be right. There are certain pleasures that exist. Once those pleasures exist, it means that it outrights even the value of non-existence being zero. Why? Because if net outcomes exist that are utile, then open opposition doesn't get the metric of being able to prove this truth in the debate. Why is this analysis important? Even if pleasures exist, the way in which human beings operate, from Johnson's own analysis, human beings are evolutionary in nature. What this means is that we adapt to pleasures that we experience. The first time I won KDO as a novice, I was so happy, but I won another tournament, I was not as happy. Why? Because I get used to the happiness and the pleasures that I feel. What does this mean? Even if the pleasures exist, gradually they become marginally utile. Their value becomes very diminishing. What does this mean? It means that gradually these pleasures lose their value. But the final mechanism tackles this head on. Because even if the marginal utility happens, what happens here then is the final mechanism. Human beings have a negativity bias. Even if you have so many pleasures, these pleasures start losing their importance to you. The problem, however, is that not only do you become much more adaptive to the pleasures that you have, but you also have a negativity bias that prioritizes all the negative experiences that you have. That is why, even though people have won so many finals, one loss or not breaking to a final means that they are stressed for the rest of their life. This ability for human beings to always prioritize negativity means that even if pleasures can somehow exist, I'm sure Jed is going to respond this way. Even if these pleasures exist, one, these pleasures lose value at a long time, but secondly, your negativity bias prioritizes the negative experiences that you face, which makes all the positive experiences or pleasures that you have in your life not important to you. That is why when someone dies in your life, you remember this for the rest of your life, even though you've had so many experiences. These are all things that matter within this round, and this is the method that proves us. Very proud to win this final.
Now it's not really. You guys, the debates, what I say doesn't represent who I am as a person or what I believe. God forbid bad things. Anyway, right. Right. 3, 2, 1. today's debate is fundamentally about us weighing two things. Number one, the moral value of life and whether it outweighs the moral, the stuff on your side pretty much, right? The problem here is with the issue with therefore, is that number one, there is no real ruler to measure how much pain is equal to the moral value of life. In extension, in their world, a paper cut is suffering, and so therefore, your life means absolutely nothing. Losing 6 or 7 finals is something which is so detrimental that your life no longer matters, etc., etc. But number two, they refuse to engage how these beliefs actually affect the thought processes of individuals and the societies within which they live in. Why is this important, and what does this mean for the case which shall be run? Number one, all human behaviors and actions, and in essence, belief systems, are directly tied to the essence of life due to the power of life itself and the fact that life is truncating and not infinite. What does this look like? It means that the religion, their laws, etc., which we create, the support systems and structures we create within society, are directly tied to the fact that we believe that life is valuable to a certain degree. What that means is that the reason why we care about minorities is because apart from the fact that we must maximize pleasure, or we must make sure that suffering doesn't exist, realize that their life is also valuable and we must take actions to benefit them, which is why Elisha's argumentation is really important. Because Elisha argues to you within today's debate how an incapacity for us to be capable of proving that that a certain amount of harm is equal to a certain amount of harm is equal to someone's life means that there is no moral justification in claiming that suffering itself has a moral value that outweighs life in and of its entirety. What they need to prove to us is that any form of suffering must be inherently harmful in and of itself. But Elisha then goes on to argue to us within today's debate the conversation about how the inability for us to measure these things, or the fact that suffering is subjective, means that people can still derive certain things. So even if he comes and talks about people who have lost certain finals, people can still derive certain values from it, like being capable of meeting new friends, the interactions you had along the way, the friends you made along the way. All of these things are also valuable experiences which are really important to the people who live on the ground and who actually do things. But second thing, deontology is based on the categorical imperative, and in extension, the laws which protect individuals, the laws which protect minorities, and the structures which we use to protect individuals in society and itself are directly tied to these things, right? First thing, a morality that says that certain things are bad can't actually truncate its own essence, number one. But number two, when you think about it pragmatically, the principle itself actively harms the utility which they want to exist in this world, because they are actively hurting your ability to to engage with the deontological framework on which our society is built. What does all of this mean? To put it rather simply, it means that in a world where people start to believe that the suffering they are going through outweighs their lives, a number of things happens. Number one, people are less likely to actually be capable of putting as much effort into their life, all of those basic things. But number two, and I'm not just going to say this, I'll give you a classic example. It means that the societies within which we live, for example, are things which are probably not going to use the deontological framework in their engagement with people on a day-to-day basis. What does this look like? It looks like in a world where we think that people's suffering are too great, we start giving them alternatives to just end it, instead of actually creating frameworks to make these people's lives significantly better. Classic example of this is things like in Canada, where multiple people have been told to just use maid instead of actually making sure these people can get treatment to make sure their lives become significantly better, to make sure we can at least give them a certain amount of meaning. But when you analyze it like this, the next argumentation Elisha brings about the conversation on choice then becomes really important. Because when you think about it pragmatically, it means that at any point in time, their world actually stops the ability for people potentially in the future to determine whether their life can have any real value by telling them that life must consistently be bad, it must always have a negative truth value. I don't know why you're snapping, you didn't say that, right? Why is all of this really important, and how it engages with the closing positions I will need to use with? Because closing position is a bit interesting. Number one, a lot of responses and things they say, the limit of empathy. Number one, everyone has a limit to empathy in the best case scenario in their world. But because we have a limit to empathy, people are probably still going to feel empathetic in a different place. So even if you get your fufu, and after getting your fufu, your empathy is waned because you care about your fufu, there are still going to be people in the West who are fighting for Palestine, who are saying that we must take actions to protect these people. There are still going to be people in the Middle East who think that Palestinians' lives must be protected and that people should actually care about these individuals in of itself. But secondly, we think that the limit of empathy is something which is actually overstated, because at any point in time we realize that the suffering which exists in this place are things which are at least proximate to us to a certain capacity. There's an active incentive for for us to care about these things because it affects us and affects our ability to actualize and get happiness. It means that people actually care about the suffering and try to do something about it. Second thing, the conversation on the hedonistic treadmill, if we pay attention to this argumentation actively attacks the negativity bias argumentation they run in their world. But let's analyze the hedonistic treadmill. Number one, this is that people would go to the hedonistic treadmill and eventually get used to happiness. I do not understand why people can't get used to sadness. For example, if you lose like 4 finals, by the 5th final, you probably don't feel as bad as the first time you lost the final. What that means is that people can actually adapt to these things and actually change the way they think, or at least adapt to the pain to a reasonable capacity. But second thing, and here's where the logical inconsistency comes in. The next case they run after is the negativity bias. First and foremost, you think that in status quo, people overemphasize the conversation of the negativity bias. Because in status quo, if something bad happens to you, you could, as he says, eat fufu, and you probably get a little bit happier, and then you can continue to live your life. What that means is that even within this argumentation, it points out that the negativity bias which exists isn't so detrimental that people can't live meaningful lives. Closing. I think
this debate is not a narrative debate. So even if people behave more negatively as a result, it does not matter, because even Elisha said this is a truth value debate.
So 2 years ago, I lost a Genesis final because he pointed out to me that beliefs affect the way society works. He can't come around today that beliefs don't affect the way society works. It affects how society works, and it matters that we today's debate. Why is the impact of today's argumentation really important? And the reason why he's trying to take that out is because he realizes that it's important, and that so far, if that's what the debate is, we are winning. That's why he wants to say it doesn't matter. Why is this really important? We're winning today's debate because aside all the mumbo jumbo which comes from opening government, right, we proved to you conclusively that truncating the essence of morality, of the morality itself, is number one bad. But number two, creating a framework upon which people don't care about the lives of individuals, where people can say there is a utility in killing of these people if it makes us happy, and that there is justification in killing of these people who are suffering because them dying off means that we are capable of freeing them. Or any framework which can be used for oppression or can be used to actively hurt people is fundamentally wrong. Our world is the side which actually posits to you that at the point where you can determine how much suffering is enough to justify the death of an individual, you must at least create a better world for them. Our world is the only world where minorities get a world where they can change things instead of being told to kill themselves. Black people aren't told that, oh, if your life is too hard, just kill yourself. They are told, change the frameworks, change the world you live in, and live a better life. We are the only side who make sure that if you're a black man in America, those people don't kill you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. We now call on the Chief Whip to end the debate.
Landlord, do you need the timer? Yeah, I do.
No, fine.
Lawrence. Is Lawrence here? Thank you for lending me your sweater. I don't normally do shout outs because I usually think I'm better than everyone else, but I think I should. So, since everyone is talking about their personal beliefs, in the spirit of oversharing, I am an antinatalist. I post about it on my status every day. So these actually are my beliefs, and luckily, my girlfriend is also an antinatalist, so thank God. Elisha didn't give a shout out to his girlfriend, by the way.
Ready when you are.
I'm just saying, she probably should slap you when you say you enjoy that. Alright, guys. Alright.
This is how we have
Shall I laugh?
now. Because when I'm done, okay. This won't be flashy because there are two ways in which we can negatively assess the moral harm, where we can assess whether the net negative moral harm of something is particularly there. One, when it directly gives us more good, or sorry, more pain than good, which everybody identifies correctly within this debate. But secondly, when it even indirectly leads us down a path of destruction that does not accumulate to something satisfactory. Everyone certainly implies this, but they don't clearly make it out and show why, even indirectly, there is some problem. I think the closest teams that try to do that is CG, but they murky up the debate in some way that I'm going to elaborate. This is not me casting a judgment on who wins on government, but I don't care. There's only one winner in finals, and that's CG. Let's engage how this debate goes. I'll take each team on their best case scenario and show why every single team is secondary to what you get from closing opposition. But then, what exactly do you get from closing opposition? The very first thing we establish to you is something that is admittedly already established by opening opposition. The fact that non-existent is a zero-sum game. Sorry, it's a zero in its sum. Particularly, what this means is that there is no pain, there is no pleasure, there is nothing. There are two competing ideas that come from these two guys in this debate. These guys say that the way up here is that life is better because life is a positive. So there is a +1 or a +2. It scales different levels. CG is a little more confusing because they say, we don't know, it could be anything. The reason why that is not strategically adept for this debate is because if it could be anything, then it equally could be a negative. So the way up could even be a negative. In the off chance that it is a negative, then we arise from CO to say that the way up is something that is unsatisfactory. The only thing they hang their quote on then is the fact that if nobody can prove definitively that it is a negative, then they can win this debate. I'll show you why we can prove definitively and why that means we win this debate. I would equally want to note that you get two different cases and two different speeches from member and whip, because the claims you get from Jed are completely different and completely new within the debate, as opposed to what you get from Elisha, because their case stances are different. His case stance is, let's save the people in America. His case stance is, oh, we don't know, so let's not make a decision. These are two different things. It's going to be criminal for you to use Jed's claims to grant them the win, even if Jed's claims are true, even though I'll disprove why, I'll prove why they are not true. So let's start with opening government, because opening government has three broad ideas. The first thing they say is that life is net utile. The only proof they provide to proving that life is net utile is that people want to continue existing. Dela already proves to you why this is not true, because most people want to continue existing because of the connections that they have. But I'm going to opine that the real reason why people want to continue existing is particularly because there's an optimism bias, because we live in a system where there are many things that exist that lie to you every time that things are going to get better for you. They lie to you every day that things are going to get okay at some point. People are mass applying to Jackpot from the country because they think it's going to work out for them. Unfortunately, and this is where we win the debate, only few people get success because of the game theory nature of things. So what this means then is that even if life is positive for some, it is mostly negative for others. But this is where we truly take the cake, because life operates on many segments. There is your love life, there is your career, there is your family relationships, there is your academics. You might be winning in your academics and losing in your love life. What that means then is that on a calculus, we do not particularly have a certainty that life is most likely positive for you. What we opine, rather, is that it is most likely negative for you off the back of a couple of things, and this is where we directly engage with closing opposition. We think that, one, there actually is objective suffering that is meted out to everybody and their mama. First, we think that the mere fact that it is bound to happen, that individuals are going to engage in a life where they will feel sicknesses at some point, they will feel rejection at some point, because you can't tell me that everybody has gotten acceptance for every single thing that they wanted in life. Ebere didn't think I was a hot boy when I told her I think she's cute. I don't think that life operates that way. It means then that there is going to be some level of rejection. What this means inadvertently is that there will be some level of pain. That pain is a certainty, because you have a lot of pain you contend with it at some point because there's a certainty of rejection. Rejection is objectively painful. What they say is that we don't know the extent of pain that rejection is going to met out to you. I do not think that it is relevant to know the extent of it. All we know is that it is unsatisfactory. Not why the way up is important, because the comparative on our side is a 0. So even if what you give us is a -1 or a -2, it is still lower and we outweigh you with a 0. It's number line, except you all failed maths, which I doubt you did because you're a university student. Then you cannot give the win to any other person but our team. Not equally why this is different from opening opposition, because opening opposition does not do enough legwork. All they claim is that if you want success in life, you will go through suffering. That could be true, but I know a lot of privileged kids that have never gone through suffering in pursuit of success. There are people who consistently get lucky every single time in pursuit of success. However, they get unlucky in pursuit of other things, and those other things constitute the net negative that they have within their life, and we are the only ones that prove that other things exist that will make you feel sad. We do not think on any account we should be losing to opening opposition. Let's then engage the second claim that they provide from closing government. Second claim they provide is that choice is taken away from individuals if we don't allow them to live, because you can only know that life is bad when they live. This is bullshit. Bullshit on 3 accounts. Account 1, choice is not expressed after the fact, it's expressed before the fact. Because people cannot tell you that I want to live before they are born, it means they could never have expressed choice to begin with. You cannot say that they can only get to choose after they live. They have to choose before they live, and there is no way for us to get them to make that choice. So unfortunately, it cannot work. But second thing, choice oftentimes is premised on the fact that it is informed. I don't know what the future looks like, unfortunately. Because I don't know what the future looks like, it means my choice can never be informed as to how or whether or not life will be pleasurable or painful. I think what that means then, I'm very sorry actually, I think what that means then is that choice cannot be a metric upon which you give them the win. If anyone wins on choice, it is our side of the debate, because we flag how, to the extent where individuals cannot make choice, the best we can do for them is to not put them in a position where they suffer from things that they do not choose. What that means then is that to the extent where there is no express consent on our side, we are the ones who win this debate. Optimism bias, game theory, and all these other things are the reasons why you think you want to live. Run away from it, dread it, but there is a landlord in Accra, and his name is Prosper Michael.